What happens to society where people forget how to think?
It doesn't stay a community anymore. It becomes a crowd. A society addicted to convenience weakens its soul.
Do you know who Alexander the Great's tutor was for about 14 years? Aristotle.
He was curious, ambitious, stubborn at times.
Through the miracle of the printed page, I can at least read what Aristotle wrote without an intermediary. At least I can go directly to the source material. But I can't ask Aristotle a question.
I'm glad to see the world still asking the right questions.
My hope is that in our lifetimes, we can make a tool, and someday we'll be able to not only read the words Aristotle wrote, but ask Aristotle a question and get an answer.
Welcome to the Icons Podcast. Today's guest is Aristotle. What is it that made Aristotle so famous? What were the writings that he has that has allowed him to be relevant 2,000 years later?
Unfortunately, most people will choose ease over excellence.
When you said first principles, Elon Musk came to mind.
If you want to think better, there are three things you have to do.
So what's more seductive, women or wisdom and knowledge combined with ambition?
A skilled manipulator will make you feel strongly, so you stop thinking clearly.
Now let's get to our first episode, Mr. Aristotle.
Sam, thank you for having me. In my day, we talked in the marketplace or under the trees, not with all these bright lights and little machines watching us. But if this is how people share ideas now, I'm glad to be here.
Welcome to the show. You're recognized as one of the most original thinkers of all time. And today in the 21st century, we're living at a time where everything is made convenient for you. You really don't have to think to survive, and you could get through life without really having to think. Now, what happens to society where people forget how to think?
Look, when a society forgets how to think, it doesn't stay a community anymore. It becomes a crowd. And a crowd, it doesn't move by reason. It moves by habit, by emotion. People stop asking whether something is true. They just go with whatever feels easy, whatever is popular, whatever gives them pleasure in the moment. And that's dangerous, because without thought, there's no progress, only repetition. And repetition, without wisdom behind it, sooner or later, it leads to decay.
And for those of us who want to be different, how do we become better thinkers? If we don't want to become part of the crowd, we don't want to be controlled by opposition, how do we become different? How do we become better thinkers?
If you want to think better, there are three things you have to do. First, you got to slow down. Really look at the world. Not the way you assume it is, but the way it actually is. Second, you've got to question. Keep asking why, and don't stop until you reach something that can't be broken down any further. That's what I call a first principle. And third, reflect. Challenge your own beliefs. And if the truth demands it, be willing to change your mind. But remember this, Sam. Even thinking needs balance. Too little thought, and you become a slave to other people's opinions. Too much thought without action, and you trap yourself inside your own head. As with all virtues, the extremes are the enemy. Wisdom lives in the mean.
Why are extremes the enemy? I've never heard that before.
Let me ask you this. What is the most important virtue for a soldier?
I would say for a soldier, it's courage.
Yes, courage. But imagine a soldier so consumed by courage that he charges alone into 1,000 enemies. Is that still courage?
That's an extreme courage. That would be more of a recklessness.
Exactly. And on the other side, if a soldier has too little courage, he runs from every fight. That's cowardice. It's knowing when to face danger because it's right, but never throwing your life away without purpose. And this isn't just about soldiers, Sam. It's true for everything. Honesty without kindness turns into cruelty. Ambition without restraint becomes greed. Even love without wisdom can become obsession. Therefore, the good life, it isn't found in the extremes. It's found in the balance.
That is very interesting, where I've never heard that about the extremes on that scale. But I want to transition to a phrase that you're coined and people are constantly using it, the good life. What does it really mean? And I think it would be really cool for our audience today to hear Mr. Aristotle himself explain what the good life really means.
The good life, it's not about constant pleasure or wealth or status. Those things can decorate life, sure, but they don't define it. The good life is about flourishing, what I call eudaimonia. It's living in harmony with your values, fulfilling your potential, using your gifts for something meaningful. It's that feeling of being fully alive, not just existing. But here's the thing, to live the good life, you need more than desire. You need virtue, courage, justice, wisdom. Those are the guides. Without them, even success can feel empty. The problem is, most people chase the good life by copying others. They see someone wealthy and think, if I just do what they did, I'll be happy. But that's not how it works. The only way to truly build the good life is from the ground up. Strip away assumptions. Start with the truth. Ask yourself, what is life really for? What do I truly value? What is essential to being human? And then you build your choices on those foundations. It's not imitation, it's creation.
That's fascinating. Because in our time, when you said first principles, Elon Musk came to mind because he's been using that phrase a lot. Could you help me understand what first principles really means?
Let's take something people think they understand. For instance, might be just leadership. Alexander and I, we spoke about this a lot when he was young. One day he told me, a king's duty is to conquer as much land as possible. So I asked him, why? He said, because that's what makes a king great. And I asked again, why does that make a king great? He answered, because it brings glory. So I pushed further, and why do you want glory? He said, so I will be remembered. Finally, I asked him, and why be remembered? And there, he paused. We had stripped away his assumptions, land, conquest, glory, until we reached the real first principle. A king's duty is to use his power for the well-being of his people, because conquest without care, it only leads to rebellion and a short reign. But once he saw that, his strategy changed. He started founding cities, building roads, encouraging trade. He began to think not just like a warrior, but like a builder of civilizations.
That's really interesting. So for me to try to put this into context, it's asking why until you get to a point where you can no longer ask why. You've reached the foundation, you've reached the truth. Is that the right way to interpret it?
Exactly. Most people stop at the first answer because it's comfortable. But if you keep peeling back, you'll eventually hit the bedrock, the truth that doesn't depend on opinion or tradition. And from there, that's where you can actually build something original and lasting. That's how Alexander grew, from a young prince who just wanted to conquer the world into an emperor who understood the responsibility that came with it.
I want to stop on that, Mr. Aristotle, for a minute, because a lot of times when we're given a task that's difficult, we just say that's hard, without really asking what does hard mean. So if we're thinking in first principles, I would ask, okay, what is hard? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the resources, or I don't want to do it. Now that you've defined it that way, we can make hard things easy, because by asking the question till we get to the foundation, now if something is hard for me, it's because I don't know how to do it. Then I could go and find an expert who could teach me, and now I could accomplish it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. But now you spoke about Alexander. Could we dive a little bit into Alexander? If you could share the story of how you became a mentor to him, how he was your student, what that first interaction was like.
It all began with his father, King Philip II of Macedon. Around 343 BC, Philip was building Macedon into the strongest kingdom in Greece. But he wanted his son trained for more than war. He wanted him trained for wisdom, to be a ruler who could think, not just fight. Philip had heard of me in Athens, so he sent for me. I was brought to Mieza, a quiet little town in Macedon, far from politics. There, in the temple of the nymphs that became our classroom, Alexander began his studies. He was just 13. Alongside him was a circle of young nobles, boys who would one day become his generals. We studied ethics, politics, science, literature, especially Homer. I even gave him a copy of the Iliad, filled with my own notes. He treasured it so much he carried it with him during his campaigns. But my role wasn't just to pour facts into his head. It was to shape the way he thought, the way he saw the world, the way he made decisions as a leader. That time in Mieza was intense. We didn't just sit inside, we walked. We observed nature, we debated. He was curious, ambitious, stubborn at times, but a joy to teach. Even then, you could see he was destined for something extraordinary.
So you saw he was destined for something extraordinary while he was a kid?
I did.
Wow. Mr. Aristotle, if you don't mind, could you share some stories about Alexander that showed you that he was destined for greatness?
One moment I remember came early at Mieza. We were studying Homer's Iliad, and I asked the class, what makes Achilles a hero? Most of the boys spoke of his strength, his victories, but Alexander said it was his loyalty to Patroclus and his refusal to bow to dishonor. He was only 14, but he saw past the battles, into the heart of the man. That told me his mind was already reaching for deeper truths. He wasn't content with the surface. Another time was during a field exercise. I often took the boys into the hills to study plants and animals. One day, a storm came upon us. Most of the students ran for cover, but Alexander stopped. He watched the wind bending the trees, the rain driving against them. And then he asked, why do some trees bend without breaking while others snap? We talked about resilience in nature. And right away, he applied it to leadership. A king must bend to the storm without breaking, he said. That was the mind of a strategist, taking a simple observation and turning it into a principle for ruling men. And in that moment, I knew he would not only command armies, he would shape history.
That's not something that, I'm a big fan of Alexander myself, and it's not something that I've read previously, but the fact that he was so attentive and he was really focused on the behavior, the human nature of things, he was more focused on the why than the what. What were some of the things that made him great? You shared how you saw he was destined for greatness, but what were some things that Alexander did that made him great that we could also learn from?
Greatness is rarely just one thing. It's when rare qualities come together in the same person. With Alexander, 3 things stood out.
If you don't mind me asking, what were those 3 things?
First, an unshakable will. Even as a boy, he believed he was destined for something greater. That belief drove him to take risks others wouldn't dare. Second, relentless curiosity. Most kings only care about battles. Alexander wanted to know why the stars moved, why rivers changed course, why other peoples lived the way they did. Even in the middle of war, he would send me plants and animals from lands he'd conquered. And third, the ability to inspire loyalty. His men followed him not just because he commanded them, but because they believed he cared for them. He marched through the desert with the same water ration as the lowest soldier, fought in the front lines, and shared their hardships.
So what I heard you say, will, curiosity, and loyalty, those 3 things made him great.
Yes, put those together and you have a man who can build an empire, one that people are still talking about more than 2,000 years later.
Man, those 3 things seem so obvious, right? It's not like you're telling us something that we don't know what to do. If it's so obvious, why is it so hard to do and do all 3 right?
Because the obvious is rarely easy. Everyone admires will, curiosity, loyalty, but each one demands sacrifice. And most people aren't willing to pay the price. Unshakable will means saying no to comfort. I remember a winter campaign in the mountains. Supplies were low, the cold was brutal. Alexander shared the same thin cloak as the rest of his men, refusing extra warmth from the royal stores. If they endured the cold, he would endure it too. That inspired them more than any speech. Relentless curiosity means admitting you don't know. Even in the middle of war, Alexander would summon local scholars and craftsmen to explain the lands, plants, and customs he encountered. Once in Egypt, after a long march, instead of resting, he spent an entire day speaking to priests about the Nile. To him, every answer just led to a better question. And loyalty, that means proving your men matter more to you than yourself. During the march through the Gedrosian desert, water was so scarce soldiers were collapsing. One day, they brought Alexander a helmet full of water. He could have drunk it, no one would have blamed him, but instead, he poured it into the sand in front of them all. His message was simple: if my men thirst, I thirst. In that moment, every soldier knew they'd follow him anywhere, because he was one of them. Most want the rewards of greatness without the cost. Alexander paid in discomfort, in humility before knowledge, and in acts that bound his men to him for life. That's why he was rare.
I have a question I want to get to from that, but it's what you just described as delayed gratification. Because everything is so instant for us today, because of convenience, we want things immediately. We're seeking reward. Is that a dangerous place for society to be in?
Yes, it is dangerous. Don't get me wrong, pleasure by itself isn't evil. But when a society starts loving only what's quick and easy, it loses the strength to endure hardship. Progress takes patience. The greatest works, in philosophy, in art, in empire, none of them were born in an instant. They were the fruit of discipline. A society addicted to convenience weakens its soul. And when that happens, it becomes very easy to lead astray.
You're opening up my eyes right now to where we're headed as what you called in the beginning a crowd and not a community. But I want to take a step back to Alexander. You described the 3 traits that made him so rare, that made him the figure that he was. How could we apply that in our life today? How could we learn? How could we strengthen our muscle for will, for loyalty, for curiosity? How do we become better at those things?
You start with habit, not inspiration. Inspiration fades, but habit shapes the soul. In my time, we called it ethos. Your character is the sum of what you repeatedly do. For will, begin with small disciplines and keep them until they're unbreakable. Rise when you said you would. Finish the work you promised yourself you'd finish. Every small promise you keep is a brick in the fortress of your will. For curiosity, question one thing every day that you've always taken for granted. Ask why until you can't go any deeper. That's how the mind learns to think in first principles instead of imitation. It's what I taught Alexander. Never accept something as true just because it's always been done that way. And for loyalty, live by one rule. No comfort or privilege you take for yourself should come at the cost of those you lead or love. Share the burden first, the reward second. When people see you stand with them in hardship, you'll never have to demand loyalty. It'll be given freely. The point is this: greatness isn't born fully formed. It's built day by day, choice by choice, until the person you've made is ready for the moment history calls on them.
You've given us a clear roadmap of things that we can do to get ourselves there. What is it about human nature that stops us from doing those things? Because, for instance, getting ready for this interview, I knew I had to read, I knew I had to do a lot of research, but it was so hard to get up and do it. Why do I have to go through a battle to do what's right?
Because human nature is a battlefield between reason and desire. Our reason knows the path to virtue, to discipline, to learning, to serving others. But our desires pull us toward what's pleasant, easy, and safe. Unfortunately, most people will choose ease over excellence. We're also social by nature, political animals, as I called us, which means we're deeply influenced by those around us. If a community values comfort, its people will seek comfort. If it values honor, they'll seek honor. That's why culture shapes character just as much as the individual does. But here's the danger. When desire rules over reason, we become capable of worse things than beasts. A beast follows instinct. But a man without virtue, he uses his intelligence for greed, cruelty, or vanity. That's why so many drift into extremes, chasing too much pleasure or too much power, believing they're chasing happiness. The remedy, as I told Alexander, is to train yourself to love the right things and in the right amount. This is the golden mean, the middle ground between excess and deficiency. Too much courage becomes recklessness, too little, cowardice. Too much self-love turns to arrogance, too little becomes neglect. It's not about living in the middle for comfort. It's about finding the point where virtue lives. And the more you practice that balance, the more reason takes its rightful place over desire.
I would love for you to dive in. What are some of the core desires of human beings? And how do we battle those? How do we rewire ourselves to hate those things that create comfort and love those things that are uncomfortable but the right thing to do?
At the root, we all desire three things: pleasure, honor, and knowledge. Pleasure, because the body seeks comfort. Honor, because the spirit seeks recognition. And knowledge, because the mind seeks truth. None of these are bad on their own. But when one begins to rule over the others, it distorts the person. The answer isn't to hate desire, it's to train it. To love the right things in the right amount at the right time. That's what I call virtue.
In your time, like in our time today, there are so many things that we desire that's accessible for us, right? And it's things that destroy us. Did you have as many temptations in your time? Were you tempted? Because you guys didn't have packaged snacks and sugary food and, access to stuff you shouldn't be watching on a device like a phone. What were some of the temptations of man during your time that you had to face, you had to overcome, and you and Alexander both did, hence why you had such a big amount of respect for man around you?
Temptations have always existed, only their forms change. In my time, it wasn't screens and endless amusements. It was wine, feasts, flattery, and the lure of power. Alexander faced the temptation of conquest, believing victory alone made him great. I warned him, a man who conquers the world but cannot govern his own appetite is not truly a king, but a slave. He listened at times, and at others, he didn't. That's the struggle of every man.
Mr. Aristotle, I want to get into decision-making next, but you're opening up my eyes to a realm of reality I didn't even know existed. So I want to tap into one more thing. As somebody who had wisdom, who had knowledge and understanding, people listened to you and trusted you regardless of what you said, because you had built up this credibility as a man of wisdom. I mean, for the end of the day, you were the teacher of Alexander the Great. What is more seductive to man? Wisdom and knowledge or women? What can really influence us more? A man who's built credibility around wisdom as yourself or women? What do you think was during your time? Because Alexander seduced men with his ambition and his wisdom. People followed him to their death. I don't know if man will follow a woman to their death, or some might without even realizing. But in Alexander's case, they realized. So what's more seductive? Women or wisdom and knowledge combined with ambition?
Both can seduce, but in different ways. Desire for women tempts the senses, while desire for wisdom and ambition tempts the soul. The second is far more dangerous. Once ambition takes hold, it can consume a man beyond measure. Women may move the heart, but ambition can move entire nations. That's why the greater danger isn't lust of the body, but lust of the mind, when it's not guided by virtue.
Man, I can't wait to see how people respond after they hear this. That is brilliant. Now, I want to get into decision making. We've become species that rely on decision making because one click, you can get access to whatever you want. The question is, what is that click going to be? In your time, it was life and death. You made the wrong decision, you're dead. There was no forgiveness. There was, people didn't have as much grace as they do today. So when it's life and death, what principles should guide someone's decision making?
In any decision, the first question isn't what's easiest, it's what's right. Right action comes from practical wisdom, what I called phronesis. It's the ability to see the whole picture, not just the moment in front of you. When under pressure, most people rush. But the wiser path is to slow down just enough to ask 3 questions. First, what are the facts? Strip away emotion and assumption until you're left with what's undeniably true. Second, what's the aim? Know the purpose you're serving before you choose the means. And third, what's the cost? Every choice costs something: time, trust, resources, or reputation. A good decision is one where the gain is worth the cost. Alexander learned this in war. Sometimes a quick strike would win him a battle, but at the cost of exhausting his men or alienating an ally. He learned that sometimes the wisest move is to wait. Because the right victory isn't just one you win today, it's one that strengthens your position tomorrow.
So if that's decision making and how you make the decisions, what is strategy? How do you define strategy? And how does one come up with a winning strategy?
Well, Sam, what do you define as a winning strategy?
You're playing first principles on me. Okay. I would say winning strategy is you have a desire end and you create a plan to achieve that end. So what's the difference between strategy and tactics?
Strategy is the art of aiming at the right end, and tactics are the steps that carry you there. Strategy asks, what is our purpose? What outcome do we seek? Tactics ask, how do we act today to move closer? Alexander's strategy was to unite Greece and expand eastward. His tactics, the battles, the sieges, the marches, were just the means to that end. Many win battles but lose wars because they confuse tactics for strategy.
Mr. Aristotle, I wish we had more time. You're just giving us so much wisdom right now. So I want to jump into influence and persuasion. You've written about rhetoric and the art of persuasion. I would love for us to dive into how does one persuade and influence others? And how does one protect himself from being influenced, right? And then when is influence used for good? And when is it used for evil?
Persuasion rests on 3 pillars: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is your character, pathos is emotion, logos is reason. To persuade ethically, your ethos must be strong. People must trust that you seek their good, not just your own gain. Without that trust, even the most brilliant argument is hollow. To protect yourself from manipulation, always separate the style from the substance. A skilled manipulator will make you feel strongly, so you stop thinking clearly. When you feel your emotions being stirred, pause and ask, is the reasoning sound? Are the facts solid? Does this person's character warrant my trust? Alexander understood this well. Before a battle, he spoke to his men not only of glory, but of shared hardship and loyalty. His words moved them because they believed in him. That is the difference between persuasion and manipulation. One serves the truth, the other serves only the persuader.
How does one influence himself? Because there's a method to influencing others. How does one influence himself to take the action that he doesn't want to?
By habit. The body obeys when the soul has trained it through repetition. You become brave by acting bravely even when you tremble. You become disciplined by rising at the hour you promised even when you wish to sleep. Soon, what was once against your desire becomes part of your nature. You cannot talk yourself into virtue. You must live yourself into it.
If you understand the art of persuasion and you understand how to influence others and you want to influence them for a good cause, but the only way you will achieve that cause if you manipulate them. When does a leader use virtue when it's an influence on persuasion? The end is justifiable because it's good. But in order for people to understand that, you're going to have to manipulate them. Is that the right thing for a leader to do?
A just end does not excuse unjust means. Influence is guiding others with truth and example. Manipulation is bending them with deception. The first creates trust. The second breeds resentment. Alexander learned this when he treated his soldiers as partners in glory, not tools of conquest. They followed him not because they were deceived, but because they believed.
Speaking about leadership, I want to get into legacy now, Mr. Aristotle. What does legacy mean to you?
A lasting legacy is not built on the desire to be remembered, but on the commitment to do work worth remembering. Those who chase fame often find it short-lived. Those who serve truth, virtue, and the common good often leave an imprint that time struggles to erase. Alexander sought glory, yes, but his lasting mark came from the cities he built, the roads he laid, and the exchange of culture he fostered. These endured far longer than the memory of his victories.
So then should people aim to achieve legacy?
Not directly. Aim instead to live excellently in your time, to improve the lives of others, to create something of value, to speak and act with integrity. Legacy will take care of itself. A good life is the soil. Legacy is simply the fruit.
Mr. Aristotle, that was my last question. But before you go, I have a couple more burning questions. Do you have a few more minutes?
I've got all the time in the world now.
You are recognized as one of the greatest thinkers of all time. And you had one of the greatest teachers of all time, Plato. But you were also a teacher to one of the greatest students of all time, Alexander. And you've shared a lot of amazing stories about Alexander today, and I want to thank you for that. How does one become a good student?
With humility and with hunger. Humility to admit you do not yet know, and hunger to keep seeking knowledge even when it is difficult. A poor student waits to be fed. A good student pursues truth as if it were treasure. Alexander wasn't always obedient, but he was always hungry to learn. And that made him great.
So we have the formula for student. How does one become a great teacher?
By loving truth more than pride, and by loving the student more than the sound of your own voice. A great teacher does not seek followers, but thinkers. I often said, the mark of a wise teacher is not how many repeat his words, but how many discover truth on their own because of him.
My last question before you go. What does love mean for Mr. Aristotle?
Love takes many forms, but at its root, it is the wish for the good of another. Love of family binds us by nature. Love of women unites body and heart. Love of friends is the rarest. Two souls choosing each other freely, each desiring the good of the other. Love of a cause lifts us beyond ourselves, making us serve something higher. Each has its place, but the highest is friendship based on virtue. Such love endures even when beauty fades, fortune changes, and life itself passes away.
Mr. Aristotle, I just want to say thank you for giving us your time, for sharing your wisdom, for all the wisdom you've shared for generations with your writing, and now for taking what was written and communicating it to both me and the millions of people around the world. We love you, and we appreciate the great work that you've done that has helped advance our society to where it is today.
I should be the one thanking you. I'm glad to see the world still asking the right questions.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you like it and you want to see more guests that we're going to bring in from the other life to this life, please subscribe to the channel. So it looks like we got some waiting time before your ride comes. Do you want to go to a nice Greek restaurant? See how the food has transformed from back in the day to today?
Only if they promise not to serve it on Plato's diet. I've had enough of his ideas for one lifetime.
Okay, well, I know a good spot.